It's a legendary monument, an emblem of the Principality of Monaco. Welcome to the Oceanographic Museum, Temple of the Sea with an exceptional heritage. As here, everything is exceptional.
I consider it the finest oceanographic museum in the world.
Like a jewel case placed on a rock. Like a daydream, a sight to see from near or far, for more than a century.
When you're lucky enough to see the building from offshore, it's like a beacon, a temple of the sea, perched above the Mediterranean.
It's an architectural miracle, built on the side of a rock. The museum towers over the sheer cliff face to a height of 279 feet. It's dizzying.
This was a gargantuan exploit when it was built in the early 20th century.
It took 11 years to build. 11 years of titanic work that itself deserves to be highlighted.
It remains an impressive building that must be maintained in its current state.
That's quite a challenge. Even today, the museum relies on the methods implemented at the time. Sweat, stones, and Eiffel beams reminiscent of those on the tower in Paris. Behind this incredible project, Albert I, nicknamed the Prince of the Seas, an avant-garde sailor who left the museum a unique legacy. To discover it, just push open the door. In here, you can travel back in time to the first marine specimens collected. You can also dive 20,000 leagues under the sea thanks to virtual reality and more, such as the 100 or so aquariums supplied with seawater via cutting-edge technology.
We pump in water about 300 yards from the shore.
Inside the pools are hundreds of species of all colors and sizes, with a special mention for the sharks, but also the corals, which appear fluorescent in the dark.
We were the first to keep corals in an aquarium, living corals.
There's also the Sea Turtles Odyssey, a real wildlife sanctuary. The Oceanographic Museum has world-renowned know-how in the protection of aquatic flora and fauna. It's a place that attracts 650,000 visitors each year, whether for its science or its art, as large-scale exhibitions are regularly held here. Jewel of the Riviera and Principality for 700 years. It is the second smallest independent state on the planet after the Vatican City. A rock 3/4 of a mile square that Grace Kelly made radiate all around the world.
This is a statue of Prince Albert I, a most beloved man, a brilliant scientist, humanitarian, and philosopher. We have many memorials to him, one of which I know you will want to see is the Oceanographic Museum.
A museum that is immediately imposing. It covers more than 107,000 square feet, exceeds 110 yards in length, and rises 279 feet above the sea, all on a cliff face.
Well, it's something of a folly, and I'm not sure we'd be able to build one like this today.
And it was Prince Albert I who had the idea. To spotlight his passion, oceanography, he thought big, very big. The first stone of the museum was laid in 1899, and it was a Frenchman who drew up the plans, Paul de la Fortrie, official architect of the Grimaldi family until his death in 1910, 6 months after the inauguration of the Oceanographic Museum. A museum that could have been located elsewhere in a more accessible place. Below the road are the St. Martin Gardens, the first public park in the Principality, opened in 1816 with impressive views of the Big Blue.
It was an ambitious project because the prince wanted to preserve the St. Martin Gardens. It would have been easier to build a magnificent building of this size in the gardens, but wanting to keep these gardens intact, he decided to anchor the museum on the cliff, on the rock.
There really was a move at the time to leave free the pre-existing Rock of Monaco, which is the basic route, and to embed another building inside, a kind of veiled reference. I come and sit on you, but I respect you.
Ça a été un véritable travail de fourmi, et il a été mis en œuvre des techniques.
It truly was painstaking work, and techniques were implemented that were innovative for the time. Eiffel beams were used, for example. These are large metal frame beams that allow you to cross the museum, to go from sea frontage to city frontage. So they erected a whole series of very thick stone walls, filled as we did at the time, and then, when we got to the first floor, these huge beams were made to create the first floors and then continued on upwards. For the time, it was quite innovative.
Pour l'époque, c'était tout à fait innovant.
It's no exaggeration to talk of amazing feats here. We're on a rock with a particularly steep slope. To hold up a museum, therefore, the architect dreamt up several techniques. He used ladder beams, which, as the name suggests, resemble stepladders. Their particularity is that they consist of two continuous cords connected by embedded vertical uprights, which gives a square mesh network, just like the Eiffel beams on the famous Parisian tower. The ground floor is on a level with the normal plane of the rock. Pelle de la Forterie decided to build the museum on pillars that rise from the sea level. This is a key point in being able to hold it up above the vertical slope of the rock, a slope with two basements, one on top of the other, open onto the sea, an ingenious process that still arouses admiration today.
I work with the technologies of the time, and ultimately, they haven't evolved that much. So they had anticipated a lot of things. The building's stability is extraordinary. It doesn't budge an inch. It's amazing.
Voilà, c'est quelque chose qui est remarquable.
From the early 20th century, thanks to Albert I, this is one of the emblems that have enabled Monaco to convey an image of Monaco internationally. This museum, embedded in the rock, is today an example of technical prowess established in the early 20th century that has remained traditional and iconic for 120 years.
That was a time when the train had just arrived in the Principality of Monaco. We're on a small piece of rock, and you had stonemasons who transported these stones. We can't compare it to the pyramids of Egypt, but to an extent it was similar.
A job of meticulous detail visible on the city-side facade, where 100,000 tons of stone from La Tourbie was used for the columns. A shrewd move. La Tourbie stone is a white limestone reputed from antiquity for its qualities. It can be cut finely despite its hardness, and above all, it retains its shine over centuries. For the other details of the facade, stones from Risotto were brought from Italy. They are more valued than marble, and even harder, which complicates the craftsman's work.
Laying the stones on the seaward facade must have been an incredible feat, and to go up in small steps like that using just stone must have been incredible to see.
The result looks like a jewel case. For the Oceanographic Museum is also a prestigious collection, internationally renowned. It's the pride of Monaco, a unique place which has watched over the seas for more than a century. It certainly won over this engineer, who worked here for 10 years as technical director.
How to describe the Oceanographic Museum? I would say temple, a temple of the sea. It's a truly magical space located in an exceptional place where you can see exceptional things. Everything here is exceptional. If you look at the architecture, the slightest detail on the facade refers to the aquatic world. You'll find animals from the seabed, algae. You'll find waves on the surface, and further up, seabirds. Finishing with two terrestrial globes that decorate the facade on its east side and on its west side.
Symbols are everywhere. And for visiting architecture lovers, the pleasure is increased tenfold. Here, you learn at every turn. On the street side facade, Prince Albert I added inscriptions which have a particular meaning.
The public often ask about these inscriptions. They're not scientists or artists, but ships. Prince Albert I chose 23 ships from the second half of the 19th century to be inscribed on the pediment of his building.
The facade on the seaside, in the same spirit, is less elaborate. But if we look closely with binoculars from the sea, we'll see that there are sculptures, there are dolphins, marine animals, so there's no place on this building where there isn't a symbol.
An interesting thing, rarely noticed by the public, is the decoration of the entrance door. It's adorned with bronze jellyfish, which form an arch. And the symbolism is that when you cross the threshold, you gain access to the secrets of the seas.
At the Oceanographic Museum, the animals are lucky enough to be able to evolve in an environment that takes into account their way of life. The pools are equipped with high-tech facilities and renovated at great expense. The proof is here with the shark pool.
It was the monumental project of the year 2000.
The works lasted a year. An exploit when you know that the museum had to remain open to the public. In the end, the aquarium is 20 feet deep. And to resist the water pressure, panes 1 foot thick were installed.
Ça a été une période de transition importante pour le musée.
It was an important transition period for the museum, a period when the large shark tank was built in the center of the museum. There are plenty of large tanks all over the world, but this one was in an historic monument between 2 floors, with visitors around. We had to create something absolutely sumptuous, with thicker panes than those in the turtle space.
Here again, we enter into another dimension with a 6,500 square foot space dedicated solely to the knowledge and protection of sea turtles.
We are 260 feet above the Mediterranean Sea, and we're interested in local species, in the protection of sea turtles and seahorses. For this, 5 or 6 years ago, we created a Center for the Protection of Marine Species, where we have a small hospital. Then, when they're a little better, we take them to a retraining pool where the public can see them before releasing them to sea, where we put a transponder on them, which allows us to follow them and to better understand their lives.
Technology in the service of nature. This too is a strength of the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco. A museum that this architect recently enhanced by renovating the turtle aquarium.
When you're born here, you're Monégasque, and you've seen this building from your earliest childhood. You can only feel proud to work for the pleasure of the Oceanographic Museum.
It must be said that the creation of the turtle pool was a major challenge, a delicate mission, that lasted 2 years.
How you can create such an iconic project without it being seen is a good question to ask an architect, because in general, the architect likes people to see what he's done. The real challenge of this project is to have succeeded in integrating a new entity without us realizing it.
The main difficulty is obviously due to the building's structure. The Oceanographic Museum of Monaco is an historic site, clinging to the side of the cliff with, at the time of its construction, stones and beam as a technique. A feat that must be respected.
They had small elements that existed on the part that we rebuilt, that we carefully laid and relayed. It's a nod to the past that we must still be able to feel and to see.
To do this, 2 types of tricks are used to perfectly imitate the existing rock. The first is a coating game. The second is to work with fake rock, where it is difficult to take stone. So the new landscape merges with the real one.
From the museum forecourt, we can't see that a new building has been built. And this was our way of marrying the Institute with this small graft and the turtle pool, which is right next door.
The other complication is the pool glass. A jewel that allows visitors to see the turtles moving around. And a technical and logistical challenge for those who set it up.
The stress was unreal as the glass came from Japan by boat and arrives here without a scratch. 7 tons to be transported with the crane. One hiccup and it's over. We can't finish. We have to reorder the material. So huge stress, but it went well. It fitted perfectly, and the stress was quickly swept away.
This too is the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco. Exploits behind the scene that aren't always seen, but that deserve to be center stage.
The project management did have an additional complexity. We had to boost the museum's capacity to pump seawater. The museum has pipes that go down to a depth of 130 feet. And if memory serves me correctly, far enough to avoid pollution, and pumps seawater, which supplies the whole museum, as lots of aquariums require seawater.
Water, source of life and uncertainties. To dig deeper, we have a date with the head of the technical department of the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco.
We don't have the right today to stop supplying the aquariums. Our residents are alive, and we can't let them down. So technically, it is one of my daily challenges.
Because seawater has its drawbacks. One of them is salt. A problem invisible to the naked eye. But look closer.
Everything you see around you is made of stainless steel, which should theoretically resist. But the salt attacks even that. It's corroded, rusty. The salt is expansive, so when it gets everywhere, it dries, it crystallizes, swells, and damages our installations. So we fight that.
At the Oceanographic Museum, you have to fight on all fronts at the same time, because salt isn't the only problem to be solved. You must also ensure that the aquariums are supplied with seawater that's as clean as possible.
We're lucky that the water is at the foot of the cliff. We need it to be of high quality. Quality is the key. If your tap water wasn't drinkable, you'd buy bottled water. It's the same with us. Biologists take regular samples, measure salinity, turbidity. bacteria levels, and so on.
For the team members, constant vigilance is required. Seawater must be renewed regularly, for the animals, but also for the visual aspect of the aquariums. A detail that might seem trivial, but which is important.
For a long time, we've pumped water 300 yards from the shore, from a depth of 160 feet.
Et 50 mètres de profondeur. On a de la filtration mécanique.
We have mechanical filtration. Then we have a UV filter. The mechanical approach uses large filters like you see beside me. Water is pushed under pressure behind a volume of sand. And as the water comes through the sand, it's cleaned of all its sediment. It's the sieve principle. The second filtration is by UV radiation. This kills off the microorganisms and viruses. One, to avoid contaminating our fish if we pump something bad into the seawater. And two, to avoid us spreading disease. We would refilter our wastewater after our processes.
Water quality is not the only worry. All the glass planes of the 100 aquariums need cleaning every morning, a routine that requires the team to be super coordinated. On top of that, today there's a major project in the coral pool, which contains 6,000 cubic feet and is 20 feet deep. The sand there is over 20 years old and needs to be replaced. Time to call an aquariologist.
The sand is clogged, in fact. The cleaning that we do regularly is no longer enough, so we have to pull out all the stops to unclog the sand and improve the circulation of water through the sand and in the pool. The challenge is both technical and biological. Technical because we have to dive in and suck up the sand, which is sent to a truck outside the museum. We have to do all this without disturbing the animals or the corals and the fish. As for the biological challenge, it's all about maintaining the balance, since the sand contributes to this balance. There's a lot of life in the sand that we don't necessarily see. So when we remove sand, we're removing a lot of the organisms that contribute to the balance of life in the aquarium. We employ corrective measures to restore this balance as soon as possible after the work is done.
One important detail. The work takes place with the animals present in the pool, because some of them cannot be taken out. The corals have grown on the stones and are now part of the scenery. And pump out 25 tons of sand without disturbing the living beings. This lasts 2 weeks.
The aim is to remove 2 feet of sand and put back only 6 or 8 inches to be able to clean more easily in the future. We'll make blocks, 15 inches deep, on which we'll put grating, a plate with holes small enough so the sand doesn't pass through. And then we put the sand back.
For the best analysis and the best protection of the animals, the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco has acquired the best possible technology. But how does it work? How can the team know what is happening under the water?
We have software that is connected to a system of probes placed in each pool, which continuously measure pH, oxygen, temperature, and salinity. We fix the parameters that the software monitors. We also set alarm thresholds. For example, if the oxygen drops, the software alerts us by phone when a pool is no longer within the thresholds we've set.
The technology enables them to respond quickly, and that's a necessity. Here, the slightest problem can be fatal to the specimens in these aquariums.
Some of our pools are heated for the tropical fish. As the seawater comes out between 15 and 17 degrees, if the heating system breaks down, we'll be pumping in cold water. Tropical fish that find themselves in 15-degree water won't enjoy it for very long, so it's important we're alerted if the temperature drops.
Quand la température descend.
All these details obviously happen backstage, and here the backstage area covers a fair surface, 43,000 square feet in all, including a test laboratory. The rest of the museum, the part that's open to the public, is closer to 65,000 square feet. A large space is needed to accommodate 650,000 visitors per year, and everything is done to enhance their experience. Here among the pools, you can gaze upon more than 6,000 animals and 350 species from the Mediterranean and the tropics.
Entering the Oceanographic Museum is not like entering a barn. It's a building that has a history. Aesthetically, it's a beautiful building.
That won't be contradicted by the museum's director, who since 2009 is Robert Calcagno.
The Oceanographic Museum is the most beautiful in the world, but it's certainly not the largest. We have 65,000 square feet to visit. There are bigger museums and bigger aquariums, but we can't and don't wish to keep fish that are too big. Jacques Cousteau, when he was in charge, banned marine animals from the Oceanographic Museum.
Jacques Cousteau is one of the legends of the museum. Born in 1910, the year after it opened, he became its director in 1957 at the request of Prince Rainier III. The beginning of a long, prolific adventure that would last 31 years.
He gave it a lot of impetus. Under his leadership, the museum was tremendously successful. It was visited by people from all over the world, and we were able to keep this international appeal. But it was perhaps through his great exploration missions with the Calypso that Captain Cousteau saw that the undersea world contained exuberant life that was under threat and which had to be protected.
The Oceanographic Museum is the only place I know that has an aquarium entirely supplied and attended by divers. If you look closely at this shot, you may recognize the diver in the foreground as Prince Rainier.
Prince Rainier III admired the work of his great-grandfather, Prince Albert I, and he was always involved in actions to protect marine mammals and cetaceans.
60 years on, the work continues in Monaco, thanks to a new generation, still just as involved in animal welfare.
Our specificity, due to the shape of the building and the size of our pools, is to present small animals. We like to present them as little gems, as if this were a jewelry store where we'd have a little diamond in the middle of a showcase. We want to allow the visitor to get as close as possible to the coral reefs or the rocks of the Mediterranean, for example, where he'd be able to see shrimp, little blennies, small animals that he'd only see if he dived with a mask, and sat 20 inches from the rocks. That really is our specificity.
Here, the whole team works for the world of the sea, in accordance with the mission set more than a century ago to raise public awareness of the beauty, but also the fragility of the oceans and their ecosystems.
We like to present fish that were born here, that come from our farms. We think it's part of our role to reproduce fish and then present them to the public.
The aim here is to remove animals from the wild as little as possible and not to increase the human footprint. Today, only 3% of the oceans are considered intact. Though intensive fishing is to blame, so too is pollution. Since 8 million tons of plastic ends up in the sea each year, this disaster is particularly visible on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. In 30 years, it has lost more than half of its coral population.
You must remember that coral is an animal. It's millions of animals, in fact, little polyps. To make a coral colony, it takes millions of polyps. And to make a coral reef, it takes billions.
They come in all colors, which makes them all the more fascinating. But that's not all. They have exceptional longevity. Some can live up to several hundred years if the conditions are suitable. It's important to note that corals are among the oldest animals in the world, as they appeared close to 500 million years ago.
Coral is part of the museum's DNA because of its history. We were the first to keep living coral in aquariums. Before, we had only presented dead corals, but they managed to adapt to the way aquariums work, the lights, the filtration and everything. Since then, it's become widespread. Lots of aquariums present living corals, but it all began here, so we've always been especially fond of coral.
At the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, the animals are entitled to very special treatment, and for good reason. Their well-being is an absolute priority, and the proof is in the pudding. On the menu here, shrimp, larvae, mussels, as well as large fish for the sharks. Feeding takes place every day except Sunday, which means that the team has to manage 2 tons of food per year.
Our objective is to present little bits of natural ecosystems, but in fact, if we do our job well, we're able to mix species. But we must offer each of them the conditions they need and therefore the possibility of hiding in the sand or in the rocks, the possibility of feeding properly. If you feed a predator enough, it has no reason to attack other fish. Feeding is a real focus for us because that's when we get a good look at the animals and can check everything's fine. For example, it's a sign if an animal stops feeding. Once or twice isn't serious, but if it goes on over time, then it's a sign that there's a problem.
And here is the king of the predators. The shark is an animal that requires great care. It has special needs, stresses that must be spotted.
To feed the sharks individually, we have a system involving tongs and targets. The sharks are used to coming to a certain spot to eat, and not all types of sharks eat at the same spot. This allows us to separate them at feeding time, and in fact, we use some tongs. We can recognize them. So we hold a piece of fish in the tongs and give it to the shark we want to feed. And if the same shark keeps returning, we take out the tongs and wait until the other one comes. It allows us to practice targeted feeding.
At the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, the public is also the center of attention. Visitors are won over by corals, some of which have a surprising power that makes them fluorescent. There are also new technologies. An immersive experience has recently been created for virtual thrill lovers.
Today, with the immersion exhibition, our visitors can dive on the Great Barrier Reef, and tomorrow visit the polar world, experience the collapse of a glacier in Antarctica, or swim with the whales in the Arctic.
The museum's intent is to be rooted in the present while respecting the past. Here, they highlight history and renew themselves. The proof came in 2010. To mark the centenary, a major renovation project took place.
I was in this job throughout the entire restoration, and it really was an impressive project.
I never imagined one day being able to join the Institute. Finally, I came to this space that would amaze me when I was young. I came to make my contribution and to provide the improvements I was asked for.
This project is the opportunity for the Oceanographic Museum to get a makeover, all while remaining open to the public. Quite a challenge when you know that even the parquet floors have been restored. And rightly so. The wood used in 1900 came from 100-year-old trees. But that's not the only treasure in the museum. In the conference room, there's been talk about a painting.
A painting 23 feet long hung at the back of the room. The painting needed renovation, so it was taken down. And to everyone's surprise, it brought to light a coat of arms, a Grimaldi coat of arms that no one was aware of, not even the palace. So when the renovation was finished, the painting was not hung back up there, it was hung in the shop.
At the Oceanographic Museum, there are many such nuggets. They're everywhere, from floor to ceiling. Plenty to attract lovers of art and history.
Everything is symbolic. The lowliest chandelier features sea animals. Even door handles remind us of the world of the sea.
Amidst all these riches, the statue of Albert I. Finished in 1908, it was gifted to the prince 2 years later for the inauguration of his Temple of the Seas, a temple with a double vocation.
During his opening speech in 1910, the prince declared that he wanted to create a temple of the sea that fused the two driving forces of civilization, art and science.
In 2010, for the museum's centenary, the management wanted to relaunch Albert I's passion for arts and science. So we invited a London artist, Damien Hirst, to put on an exhibition called Cornucopia that was slightly outrageous. The idea was to blow away the museum's dusty image and give it a contemporary feel.
Damien Hirst is one of the most highly rated contemporary artists on the planet. In 2007, he beat the record for the most expensive work ever sold by a living artist, For the Love of God, which fetched 74 million euros at auction.
It was rather like a cobblestone in a pond. The museum was a very calm, very peaceful surface. The Damien Hirst exhibition created a few jolts that would restore its dynamism.
You can't imagine what it all involved. There was a large tank of about 1,200 cubic feet, holding around 32 tons, that had to be installed in the main lounge. The floor wasn't built for that. It was made a century earlier. So we had to dismantle it, strengthen the structures, and create new structures to bear the pool's weight. Then we had to follow the numbering of each strip of the parquet floor to put them back in place, as if the tank had always been there standing on the parquet floor. We don't go in for gigantism here, just fine craftsmanship, lace making. A simple exhibition is a construction site.
There would be several, each with the same desire to surprise. In 2011 came Oceanomania, and the creation of the largest cabinet of curiosities in the world dedicated to the ocean. An opportunity for the public to discover rare objects and to travel in time or space. A unique experience that we owe to the American artist Mark Dion. An artist who was inspired by the museum's collections and who would install a large stuffed white bear, as well as a diving suit dating from 1797. Incredible. At the time, it allows its inventor to breathe for several minutes at a depth of 40 feet.
There's a lot of emulation involved in these exhibitions, and a whole lot of worry for technicians like me. Because we always manage, whether by a fraction of an inch or the slightest ounce, but we manage. And we still do it because we like it.
Here, everything is done to give substance to artists' XXL dreams and to make the public's eyes shine. And new proof came in 2017 with Philippe Pasqua's exhibition. Once again, it's spectacular art. the French visual artist filled the Oceanographic Museum with pieces with a strong message: to denounce the harmful exploitation of the oceans by man. He used sculptures of marine animals, victims, in XXL format.
The last major contemporary art exhibition was Borderline by Philippe Pasqua. Philippe Pasqua took over the whole museum. 10 XXL works, 7 of them new. I'm thinking in particular of Soleil Noir, which was 3 sea urchins, each 50 feet in diameter, that he wanted to anchor to the foot of the rocks on the seaward side.
Implementation was complicated because they were bulky and dangerous, as they can sting, and their stings were that size. They were sea urchins in the truest sense. They had to be passed over the roof of the museum. There was only one solution. The complication was the distance, the jib of the crane that was needed. So a 220-ton crane with a 230-foot jib was needed to pass the sea urchin over the roof and down to the foot of the cliff.
The other rather spectacular work was Who Should Be Scared?, which is a giant stainless steel shark. It was installed on the terrace and suspended from a slightly rusty metal beam like a fishing trophy. That was the first time at the museum that I'd heard the public arriving on the terrace and saying, "Wow." That was very satisfying.
In 2018, the Oceanographic Museum continued its momentum and notched up a new exploit with the installation of a digital space to host the Monaco and the Ocean exhibition.
It was prodigious. We brought a boat skeleton into one of the exhibition rooms. We put technology into it. So far, in my experience, I've never had to open up floors, look for structures, and quality test them. Because when you dump several tons of equipment on an old floor, you must know that it will hold. But we work on old materials, in particular so-called Eiffel beams. These are metal sections assembled in zigzag. The thing is, at the time, the quality of the iron wasn't the same as it is today. Its resistance wasn't the same, and so on. We therefore had to run tests on the quality of the metal and make empirical calculations. That's something that will remain etched in my memory in the history of the museum.
Monaco in the Ocean is the last project on which I worked. It's a permanent presentation of the actions of Prince Albert I, Prince Rainier III, and Prince Albert of Monaco in favor of the oceans.
Today, the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation acts in 3 areas: climate change, biodiversity, and water. 3 worrying subjects that weigh on our planet. And this is highlighted by the work of the Institut Oceanographique.
We have a mission to save the world's oceans. This is necessary groundwork. One of the challenges is to work with the United Nations to better protect the high seas.
The high seas do not belong to any country and represent slightly more than half the surface of the planet. To preserve them, we must act collectively. The same goes for the rest of the oceans. There's a whole world to defend out there. A world apart, vast and vital, producing half of the oxygen we breathe. A world for which the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco has not finished writing its legend.